I'm standing in front of one of the oldest buildings in Pamplona. Built in 1548, it is 478 years old. And that is saying something because I am 430 years old. Wicked skin routine. But I want to know how it has been able to last so long. In fact, how have any of these old buildings been able to last so long, especially considering buildings that we constructed even only just 30 years ago are in constant threat of being demolished or they're already abandoned? What wisdom are these badass buildings hiding? My name is Rachel, and I have spent the last decade studying how to build great places so that today I can be your guide to better place design. We have 9 design principles that old buildings use that have granted them the title of badassness, and we will be going through all of them today only to answer the ultimate question: can these principles still be used today? So, starting from most to least obvious, we see old buildings all over the place because buildings that last for centuries do 2 things. They're advantageous because it's cheaper long term, which also makes them more sustainable because maintenance takes less energy than tearing something down and rebuilding it again. Because the embodied energy of a material that was used in a building built hundreds of years ago is far less that than the new concrete and steel that has been worked and manipulated to create the new buildings that we see today. However, I will caveat that modern materials are stronger, but these also come with their pros and cons. God forbid there's a fire and steel is going to quickly melt while wood will likely char. Or in the case of masonry construction, the widths or the width of the brick wall slightly moves when wind hits it, which means everything is always kind of reacting to whatever's happening in the environment around it. But that's much more difficult when you have a large frame of a building like steel or concrete, because now we have to factor in a lot of more technical information to make sure that that building doesn't topple over or the materials themselves don't break, which means newer buildings have higher costs associated with them, they have higher technical knowledge needed to build them, and ultimately they're harder to repair. Therefore, badass buildings aren't necessarily stronger buildings, but they are more durable long term. But as durable as a durable building can be, it's not going to last very long, and a lot of them sit in ruins even here in Spain, if we don't consider other design principles that make them useful long term. Sí, mira, ¿cómo estás? Sí, ya le reconozco. Bien, bien. Aquí grabando otro video.
Muy bien.
Venga, adiós. One of which things is the quantity of different ways we can access this building. That's just fantasy talk for how easy is it to access by bike, by bus, by tram, by foot, or even by car. Basically, how many of these options are readily available to you when you leave your front door. This is going to look a little bit different depending on if you live in a rural area, a town, or even a city, but ultimately having the option to walk or bike places make you healthier and increase the probability of serendipitous interactions with your neighbors and friends. Like the one that just happened there. That was absolutely not planned at all. It was a woman who has seen me shooting out in here before. This also benefits you financially because if you're not always dependent on a car to get around, you're saving money on gas. Maybe you don't need as many cars either, and so therefore you're saving money on car payments and insurance. And before you say, oh, she's anti-car, no. It's not to say that you can't have a car. It's just that you should also have other options available to you to get to the things that you want and need in your life. In other words, bars, restaurants, marketplaces, cafes, anything that's built in close proximity to you makes it more accessible and therefore easier for you to use. Which I don't know about you, but it's pretty badass that having multiple modes of transportation can literally contribute to you being healthier and becoming wealthier. And that's the second design principle on our design principles list. Now, we're kind of getting smart to this and know that multiple modes of transportation increase our accessibility not only to central parts of our city, but other parts as well. But of the developments that I have on screen here, which of these are you more attracted to? Like, here's an example. If I were to tell you they were going to tear down the Geisel Library in San Diego to replace it with a new one that was in the same location, the building itself is not something that you probably care enough about to make a fuss over it being completely remodeled. Versus if this building was actually loved genuinely by the public eye, it would more likely last for centuries. And we know this because examples of it exist all around us because these quaint streets and oddball buildings are really easy to love. And when something is lovable, we want it to stick around for a long time. So therefore, we're more likely to maintain it and care for it long term. But it also gives people reason to feel a sense of place in their community and therefore strengthen their community bonds. We gotta write it down. We gotta write that principle down. Lovable buildings, lovable. But if we're talking about trying to apply these principles today, does building a lovable building have to be expensive? Well, back in the day, money wasn't flowing like it is now. Not that it's flowing like crazy right now, but this meant many builders were just using materials that they had on hand. Of course, they were doing the best that they could to make these buildings as good of quality as they were capable of doing at the time, but you'll notice that the pattern here is places that are loved have been built with a lot of traditional materials that are locally sourced. While this kept construction costs pretty low, the materials that they were using still had the grand tasks of needing to ventilate the space or making sure that it was cool inside depending on wherever the climate was. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to interrupt your video. We'll be back to our regularly scheduled program in just a second. I only wanted to say thank you so much for the 10,000 subscribers. A really good friend of mine told me that I should celebrate my little wins, and I just wanted to say thank you all. This has been a crazy, incredible start to the year. I'm extremely excited for the work that I have to come and all of the different people who have reached out to contact me. I wanted to celebrate with a little treat and figured this is your time to go and grab one yourself, continue the video, and celebrate with me. So thanks again, and back to the video. But because they didn't have these new modern technologies to help assimilate or adjust the temperatures inside of their homes, those materials had to carry their weight. So, look at the houses, the Trulli houses, and would it be Trulli? I think it's like Trulli. Tell me if you're Italian, is that how you pronounce it? Credo che le case Trulli. Tell me about All right, I'm getting off track here. The thick stone walls of the Trulli houses were to help keep areas inside cool where farmers were working in nearby fields. But even still, materials were super cumbersome to move around, so they were really trying to do the best that they could with the limited resources and materials that they had. But that meant things like homes would share walls with one another and support each other structurally, or just keeping spaces small in general because the materials weren't able to sustain as large of spans, or in practical senses, it would keep you closer to your neighbor who may have other goods and services that they would be able to provide you, and therefore you didn't have to travel as far to get to those things. And living in these compact environments also meant that they had better access to nature. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Design principle 4 is building buildings frugally, or frugal buildings. Oh, we shouldn't overglorify the past though, Rachel. They had their own set of problems that a lot of regulations and policies that we have in place in our modern world help us with today, and it has drastically improved our quality of life. Hold your horses, I totally agree with you. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves now, but I promise we'll touch on that in just a second. Getting to some of the less obvious principles now, one of the added benefits of building in clusters or compactly is that we're able to then have better access to farmland and nature. And the closer that our access is to natural lands increases our access to food and water. This doesn't even have to be massive amounts of farmland, but cities and towns that try to incorporate green space or places where we can grow edible plants in any available earth space, terrain, earth, can create better access to food. Now, you know what I'm going to say. Having access to a stable food source and knowing how to cultivate it yourself is... What is it? I'm imagining you saying it at home watching this video. It's pretty badass. But another key part to the longevity of these old buildings and these old towns and cities is the fact that they had access to places that nourished them. All right, but do we always have to use 100% traditional materials in order for our buildings to have more longevity and be lovable and all this stuff? Look, this is meant to be a framework for you to use as a guide to discuss design decisions in your city so that it can become a safer, more financially stable, and healthier place. But I realize that that can be kind of difficult, especially one video isn't going to answer all your questions. So I decided to make a PDF, so you can check that out in the link below, to allow you to bring those to meetings and make sure you're checking all the boxes when new designs are being presented for your city. But I get it. Many of these old buildings lacked insulation, they lacked plumbing, they lacked access to sunlight, or they weren't even ADA compliant, which, like, big red flags. Big red flags for old buildings. Today, this idea of taking something that was old, like a palace, and making it into something new, like a community center, has been coined adaptive reuse. And they're doing the same thing with this old school here in Pamplona by turning them into apartments. They had simpler structures, but oftentimes, because the scale of these places were so small, they also had to fit multiple different functions inside of these spaces, making them inherently more flexible, which was unintentionally easier to adapt long term. Buildings that are able to adapt with the times are ones that are more likely to last. One thing you'll notice outside of various access to different modes of transportation is all of the different businesses that are sprinkled around this old and compactly designed city. However, access to services like this isn't exclusive to cities that have been designed in this way and have 100-year-old buildings. Look at this tiny town in Huesca, Spain. The population is predominantly farmers, but I want us to focus on this one building. Here is where the farmers go to meet after work. They can all walk here. But it's also a hotel that offers amazing breakfast to both guests and anybody looking for a hot meal before work. This town has been here since the 15th century, and a lot of its buildings look like they've been here for just as long. How cool is that? Regardless of where you live, whether that be a rural town or city setting, access to services in a convenient manner were always a necessity of ours and a priority that we needed to meet. Which, if you design it right, brings people out of their homes and activates this public realm that everybody shares. And by having more eyes on the street, as the infamous Jane Jacobs calls it, means that the area is actually safer because we have more people, especially in our community, who are watching the street and making sure nothing weird and suspicious is going on. Which is achieved through all of these different design principles that we have mentioned earlier. And the more we feel that we can rely on our neighbors, the safer our neighborhood feels, and the stronger our community is. And last, but certainly not least, with so few material elements and resources to fulfill our daily needs, oftentimes the actual architecture part was an afterthought. Like all of these places that we really, really love, of course they're sprinkled with landmarks here and there that did have more money and financing to be built in a level of grandeur. But the stuff that we love, the reason that we like going to a lot of these different places around the world and visiting their old towns, is a type of architecture that's very humble. And it's because it had to meet all of these different needs, these 9 different principles, in order for people to feel like they could live well, connect with their community, and have access to food, shelter, and water. Most of the time, the architecture was just the ability to see how a building was built just by looking at it. What I'm trying to say is that the architecture is really legible. It's very easy to digest, it's easy to understand, but it's still interesting, and it still tells a story. It shows conflict and constraint. Nos muestra cómo sobrevivían la gente en aquella época. The fancy term that people use for this is vernacular architecture, which is not my favorite word because I find that it's somewhat difficult to explain, but basically it's that buildings were built to adapt to regional circumstances and that people took advantage of local materials to do so. Which means the city is more legible, making the buildings less daunting to be around and the city overall more navigable. I'm not trying to say that we have to build without AC or heating, but I think we underestimate our ability to tackle a lot of the problems that go on in our built environment today with a severely restricted material list to do so. Here's the good news. Old buildings have not directly been proven to improve our lives. However, the use of these different principles and the forms of buildings that come out after their adoption creates environments that have been proven to make us healthier long term. So if we want to go back to building this way, we have to start incorporating these 9 principles into our design conversations. Because as more demand is generated for cities and towns that create healthier environments for us all, the harder that request is to ignore.